Hi friends, today I'm going to show you how to make a Suffolk puff, otherwise known as a yo-yo. This is a great little project for using up little scraps or remnants of some of your handwoven fabric that you may have, and it also has the added bonus of being able to incorporate some handmade buttons that you may have lying around. Before I get into the tutorial, I would love to ask you to like this video, subscribe to my channel and click the bell notification so that you're notified of all my new videos. Also, there will be a blog post associated with this video that will have measurements and extra tips for you, so the link for that will be down below. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. The scrap of fabric that I'm using is a piece of hand-woven and hand-dyed indigo cotton. This was a woven with 8/2 cotton, so it's fairly fine and just right for this type of project. The piece that I actually want to use is going to measure about 5 by 5 inches. This piece is longer than that, but you'll see in a moment that I'm only going to use the top part. Now what I need to have is some very light fusible interfacing. You can get fusible interfacing of all kinds of heaviness. This one is a really whisper light one. So on one side it's very soft, and on the other side it has these tiny little bumps, and the bumpy side is the side that has the glue that's going to fuse with your project. So I'm going to place that face down on the top part of my fabric. So obviously the part of the fabric that I want to show is going to be on this side. So take that into account if you need to. So I'm placing that face down, and then what I'm going to do is just grab a scrap cloth and I'm going to pop that over the top to protect my iron while I iron down the fusible interfacing. Now your interfacing, it usually comes with some instructions, but it's fairly straightforward. The main thing to be aware of is just don't put the sticky side or the fusible side onto your iron, because it will fuse to your iron. That's another reason for using the presser cloth as a kind of fail-safe. Alright, let's have a look and see if that's fused. That has beautifully fused with the fabric. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut the part that I actually intend to use, and then I've got more of that fabric left over for next time for another project. Now the fusible interfacing, we use that for a couple of reasons. It stabilizes the fabric and gives us a surface to draw on, but it also prevents the fabric from fraying. Once you've cut your circle out, there may be a small amount of fraying, but the way that we stitch our yo-yo means that all of the raw edges are going to be turned to the inside, so that won't matter. But I find that the fusible interfacing does a really good job of keeping the fabric from fraying. Next step is to use something as a template for your circle. I'm using just a masking tape roll, and the inside of it is a really stiff cardboard, so it's quite sturdy. And I'm just going to place that down on the surface. You can either draw around the outside of that for a larger puff, or the inside of it for a smaller one. I think that I will draw around the outside of it. I'm using pen because it shows up easily, and it's not going to mark my fabric at all. It's just going onto the interfacing. Okay, so now we can see my pen. And then the next step is to just simply cut that out. Now I should have mentioned that before you do any of this, you want your interfacing to have cooled enough, because while it's still hot or warm, that glue is not completely set. So make sure you've given it a little bit of time to cool off. The interfacing also makes the fabric easy to cut, so it's simple getting nice straight cuts. A good pair of scissors certainly helps. And if you want to know more about where you can get fusible interfacing or what type to get or any of that sort of thing, all those kind of links will be on my blog. So this is what we've got now. On one side, you can see the interfacing, that's the fluffy soft side, and it's completely fused to my fabric, so that on the other side you can see the fabric. And you can also see how that fabric is held really nicely at the edges by the interfacing so that it's not going to fray on us. Alright, so I've got my fabric circle and I'm going to have the interfacing side facing me. I've also got just a regular sized sewing needle and I've got some black thread and I've knotted it at the end and I've made a fair length of it. Let's say it's about 12 inches in length, maybe a little longer. The thing about the thread is make sure that you use a strong thread. I always use Gutermann thread. The link to that will be also in my blog. I use it for all of my sewing. It's 100% reliable. Sewing thread is one area where I don't skimp on the quality. Okay, so all we need to do now is just come in a little ways into our circle with the sewing thread, and we're going to be sewing it so that the knot is on this side, so we can pull through. So we've sewn that through to the other side, and now we're going to come up a similar distance in from the edge and a little ways away. Now as far as the distance from the edge, I reckon I'm around 1 centimetre, maybe a little less than 1 centimetre. And then when I come up, I want to be a similar distance away from the edge. And pull that through. And then I want to go down. Once again, keeping that border edge all the way around. So as for the length of stitches, they're fairly short, but they're also long enough to be able to gather properly because we're going to gather up this fabric in a moment. This is called a running stitch, and some people might call it a gathering stitch as well. It's very easy to do. You don't need any stitching skills to be able to do this. If you can thread a needle, you can do this. And you want to keep your stitches at a similar length. Don't be pedantic about it, but if you can be around a similar length, then that's helpful because it's going to give you more even gathers as well. So I reckon that these stitches are around 1 centimetre long. Not too big, but not tiny. If you do really tiny stitches, then it's going to be hard to gather up. This project is very simple and it's great because you don't need a sewing machine to do it and you don't really need any special equipment. Ready to gather up, so make sure that your last stitch ends on the inside and then you can just simply begin to pull up gently so as not to break your thread, but like I said, if you use a good quality thread, shouldn't be any problems. And that will start to gather up like so. You can sort of use your finger to anchor it in the middle, and you can sort of gather, you can arrange the pleats a little bit until you get to a point where your hole has become much smaller in the middle and it's all drawn in together. And you want to gather those in fairly tightly. Now that you've gathered up your yo-yo, the next part is just to decide which button you think is going to be most suited to your particular yo-yo. I just went through my collection and I've got some that are covered with hand-woven fabric, and so you can just start placing the button on there and see whether you like the way that it looks or not. I'm going to try another hand-woven button. I think they both look really nice. I have a class for this. It's a members only class in my online weaving school if you're interested in learning how to do that. But also what I've been doing recently is some hand stitch buttons, or mostly they are known as Dorset buttons, and these are really cute and I really enjoy making them as well. So I've got quite a few of those gathered up. I have already made another yo-yo with one of those buttons, but I think for this project I would like to use one of these. So I'm just going to test them out and see which one I like the look of most. Very nice. Bear in mind too that when you're placing your button on, you're going to stitch it down, so it's going to look a little flatter than it does just sitting there like that. Yes, I like that one as well. That one, oh, that's nice, but it's almost a little bit small for my gathered hole. You want the button, the outside of the button, to cover all of these raw edges entirely. And that one's just a little bit too small, so I'll count that one out. I do really like my hand woven buttons, but I think I'll save them for another project. I think the one that really appeals to me is this one. Yeah, I like the contrast between the colours. So we've still got our thread hanging off here or attached to here at the edge. So you can just redraw that up because that does loosen off a little bit. And then I'm going to put the stitch underneath to my button because these button backs are flat. And I'm going to begin to stitch that button on. Now, when you make these, the bottom side of it doesn't generally show because you'll usually use this as an outer side to show the outer side because that's the most attractive side. So if that's the case for you, if you're not going to show the backs of them at all, then you can take your needle down in the middle and out the back and then back through again to get your button secure. You want to make sure that your button stays centered and that it's covering those raw edges, as I pointed out before. So I'm going to do very small stitches. The middle of my button is dark, so these stitches aren't going to show. But if you had a different color in the middle of your button, you could always match your thread to that if you're worried about your thread showing. I'm just going to keep stitching through there. By the way, if you're interested in the Dorset buttons, because I know a lot of people were interested when I posted about them on social media, I want to recommend a channel to you. It's Gina B Silkworks, and I'll have the link for her down below. She's got a great channel all about not just Dorset buttons, but hand stitch buttons, and some of them are absolutely gorgeous. I really want to try some other different types as well. So go and show her channel some love. There's also another lovely lady who has some Dorset button videos. Can't think of her name right at this minute, but I will link to her down below as well. Basically the Dorset buttons are made by a silver ring, so underneath all this stitching is a silver ring, and you can stitch with a variety of threads. So this one I've used embroidery floss, which really stands out and contrasts beautifully and also gives a really nice sheen. But yeah, there's all different threads you can use to do it. So really it's up to you how many stitches you actually put through the button and how securely you want it stitched on there. Probably depending on what you actually intend to use your finished puff for, or your finished yo-yo. I'm going to stitch a little around the outsides of the button as well, just to get it held in a bit more towards those raw edges of the weaving. Now, if you're wondering what you might actually use one of these for, I have attached them to little girls' headbands. I think they're also called Alice bands elsewhere. And also little girls' hair ties. Really lovely. And for a more grown-up version, not that you couldn't do headbands for grown-ups, but if you're not inclined to, you could also stitch a brooch backing to this, which you can get from all different like jewelry supplies places or craft stores that have that sort of thing. Stitch on a brooch backing and you've got a lovely unique brooch. You could even have a brooch to go on one of your hand woven pieces onto a shawl or something. And you can also use them for embellishments, for bags or for cushions or pillows, all kinds of things like that as well. You can basically attach it to anything. I just wouldn't want to attach it to something that needed washing frequently, because then they're more of a decoration than something that can be laundered a lot. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with my stitching now. I think that is fine. So I'm just going to turn it over and knot off at the back. I'm going to knot it pretty securely, so doing quite a few different knots here. And then once I'm happy with my knot, and I'm not happy with my knot, that's better. So it's a nice big knot. It's not going to pull through and leave my button unsecured. I am just going to sink the needle back in, and I can have it come up on the other side, and then just cut that thread close to the fabric so that it doesn't show. And there we go, we are finished our yo-yo or Suffolk puff, and it's ready for whatever purpose I'm going to use it for next. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you make some of your own little yo-yo puffs. Don't forget to check out the blog post for all the extra details, and please do share this video if you think it would be useful to somebody else. Until next time, happy weaving.